And so I'll start by introducing myself and my colleague, David. We run the Chief of Staff Network, which is an online membership community for chiefs of staff all around the world. And we provide courses, content, events, networking, consulting, career coaching, you name it, for chiefs of staff to help them do the best work of their lives. And my name is Rahul. I'm the general manager. I'll turn it over to David, and then we will turn over to our guest, Christian.
Cool. Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is David. I'm here in Chelsea at the moment. Yeah, excited to learn more about OKRs. Thanks in advance, Christian, for doing this.
You're very welcome. Pleasure to be here. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Christian Ulstrup. Today, I'm going to give you a presentation about a lightweight approach to OKRs. I'm sure most of you are familiar with OKRs. I know that's sort of a top responsibility for chiefs of staff, is getting everybody aligned and on track. So thank you, Rahul and David, for inviting me today. Let's get going. All right. So quickly, intro. So the outcome I'm hoping to achieve here is to arm you all with a new lightweight approach to OKRs that you can use to get your teams aligned, reduce management overhead, and accelerate learning. Quickly about myself. My name is Christian Ulstrup. I run a boutique consultancy called GSD at Work, that stands for Get Stuff Done at Work. I've been using OKRs for over 7 years at different organizations, mostly venture-backed companies at sort of the seed Series A stage, using OKRs to really help put some structure around things as companies quickly scale up. So I've also worked with a nonprofit and a lifestyle business, but that's generally sort of like 50 to 200 employees is really where I've gotten the most reps in doing this. Okay, so first of all, upfront contract. I like to do this with all my clients and sponsors. Basically, if at any time you feel like you're not getting value out of this conversation, this presentation, not achieving the outcome, you of course are welcome to part ways. Your attention is invaluable. And same thing goes for you, Rahul and David. If you feel like this is not doing it for you, you can kick me out and shut the presentation down. So with that being said, Rahul, would you like to proceed with the presentation?
Absolutely. I mean, I had the benefit of reading the deck in advance, and I think it's going to be great. So no worries here.
All right. I'm glad to hear it. All right. So quickly, agenda. So opening, we're doing this right now. We'll talk about when to use this approach, the foggy river metaphor, which is something that I share with all my clients, the actual mechanics. So how to apply this approach to OKRs, really simple. There are just 3 parts. It's you set OKRs, you sync weekly, and then you reflect quarterly. What are some common pitfalls? And then we'll talk about next steps, do a fist of 5, which is sort of a best practice I like to do with every meeting for quick feedback. And then we'll do question and answer at the end. I think we have 45 minutes, but I can go certainly until the top of the next hour. All right, great. So first of all, is this approach right for me? I'm going to talk about conditions and feelings that you might have, which would be a sign that this is right for you. So your principal suddenly has more money. Whoop. I don't know if somebody just dialed in. Okay. Your principal suddenly has more money than time. Usually the clients I work with are VC-backed founders. They raise a chunky seed or a Series A round, and suddenly they really need to scale up. You're working in, this could be true for a business unit at a bigger company as well, but you have a lot of capital that you need to put to work. You're working with a remote native team, especially, in sort of 2022, 23, where a lot of folks are working remotely. It's more important than ever that you keep the team aligned, that you have some structure in place and you're disciplined, because you don't have that tacit knowledge transfer just from being together in person. And the team is doing new things, right? So it's an innovation unit or a startup generally. All right. And in terms of how you feel, what you're doing before is not sort of working. You have that kind of like frenetic energy when you're going 0 to 1 with the startup, not a lot of process. That can work really well up until the point where it just does not work anymore, which is generally when you start scaling up. At that point, you feel like you're doing a lot, you're expending a lot of energy, but things aren't moving forward. There's, personal friction, maybe some friction in communication, things sort of get dropped. You start to notice this more. Perhaps you've tried using OKRs. Oftentimes it's somebody on the board or one of your investors is like, hey, you should, read book X or read this blog post. And, you try the paint by numbers approach, you do it for a quarter and everyone's like kind of annoyed because it hasn't really changed anything. And sort of the kind of the worst feeling is like you look at your bank account after a big round, a quarter passes, and there's a life-changing amount of money that's just like gone. and you feel like it wasn't put to work. So that's a pretty good sign that it's time to try something new. Okay, so let me share the foggy river metaphor. This is a way to think about what it is you're doing as a startup or as a team, a division, like an innovation division at a bigger company. There are really three components. Okay, so imagine you're looking at a top-down view of a foggy river. You've got where you are in the present day, you've got where you want to go, and you've got a direction. The direction across the river, let's say you're looking at a shining hill in the distance, that direction is your infinite mission. So it's what your company, your team can do, should do, that nobody else is going to do, right? It's your purpose, right? Your long-term vision is a 5, 10, 20-year concrete instantiation of that mission. So what would it look like if you were accomplishing it? So you have these three components. Now the question is, how do you get across? And this is where things are really tricky, because the truth is there is conceptually some combination of stepping stones. Let's say there's stepping stones across the river that you would have to step out to get to the other side. But the problem is, because it's foggy, you have radical uncertainty. This isn't something that you can just, plan. You can't know what the red line is to get from here to there. So, okay, so how do you use OKRs to do that? Think of OKRs, objectives and key results, as stepping stones that you commit to stepping out onto on a quarterly basis in order to do two things. One is to accelerate your progress towards this long-term end, but two, and perhaps more importantly, is to disperse the fog. So OKRs are a tool and a process for aligning team energy towards a common end, both in the short and the long run, the sort of more proximal quarterly goal, and developing an information edge. So by learning things that you don't know, and hopefully nobody else knows, that actually turns into market power and a competitive advantage. And that's something that compounds if you're running this process well. So OKR, stepping stone, there are lots of ones that you can step out to at any given time. A big part of the art of this is choosing the right one. But if you do this sequentially, quarter over quarter, things really go right. Okay, so let's say that we're zooming in now just to this first OKR, the stepping stone you're going to step out onto. This is more or less what it looks like. So the actual process of OKRs, there are 3 steps. There's setting, syncing, and reflection. You set and you reflect once per quarter. I have just down there the goals of each step and sort of what it takes. The way to think about this is like, okay, Jan 1, you do a setting workshop. It involves all the executives. It takes about 5 hours. At the end of that, you should come out with just 1 objective and 3 key results. There are plenty of people who disagree with me on this. This is one thing that I'm just totally a stickler about. I don't work with any clients unless the executive team can commit to 1 objective and 3 key results for the entire company, regardless of how big they are. I'm sure people will push back on me in the Q&A. I feel very strongly about this. Okay, so you set the objective and the key results. The objective is qualitative. The key results are always quantitative. And then each week at the same time, I generally recommend Monday or Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m., you have an hour-long sync where it's not a status update meeting. Through the filter of the objective and the key results and confidence scores, and we'll talk about how to do this, you surface new information that was gathered from different members of the team in the context of the OKR over the past week, from experiments, from making contact with reality. And then you make a plan to figure out which of those insights you're going to exploit to make outsized progress over the next week. That's basically what you're doing. It's not a status update meeting. And then finally, at the end of the quarter, you're going to reflect, you're going to mine insights, and you also have an opportunity to shape company culture. And I'll talk about how to do that in a second. Now, keep in mind, this is a non-trivial expense in terms of executive labor. Depending on how you quantify it, you're looking at investment of tens of thousands of dollars, right? Now, that's expensive, but it's also an extremely high leverage process. And of course, if you've raised money, if you're kind of playing a high stakes poker game in that regard, you want to make sure that all of these touch points are of just the highest quality. So simple, not cheap, but not too expensive. Important that you do it well. All right, so let's zoom into
Christian,
yep, sorry, go ahead.
There was a good question in the chat on this slide, which is how do you make syncing actionable versus just about pure insight?
We will talk about that in just a second. It's a great question.
Awesome.
Yes. I'm all about action. And I actually think if you do strategy strategy and tactics like completely melt together. So there's no difference when this works. Okay. So everything should be actionable. Whoops. All right. I just skipped forward too far. All right. So let's talk about the actual setting. There are really 3 steps. So there's the preparation that you want to do as a chief of staff. And you have 2 goals. And let's say like the week leading up to the meeting. It's to build trust with stakeholders and executives, and it's to surface information. And you can do this. I mean, this is sort of my recommendation. You do this in 2 ways. One is shuttle diplomacy, which is a tactic that Henry Kissinger used, I think in like the 70s or something during one of the Middle East conflicts, where he would go from nation state to nation state to have these little like quick touch points, unstick information, share before there was like a big, peace treaty negotiation. You're kind of doing the same thing. You want to get 3 things out of these conversations with each executive. One is, what is the pain that they're feeling? Think of it like prospecting, like a sales process, like probe for pain, figure out what's bugging them. Identify it. 2 is do a pre-mortem. So if the company failed to achieve its mission and manifest its vision, why would that have been the case? So get them to articulate what their perception is of what the cause would have been for failure in the future. And then try to find out what would it take for them to feel confident that that wasn't going to happen. Those are roughly 3 data points you want to get. And then I also recommend doing an anonymous survey company-wide. One is just a straight confidence score from like 0 to 100% of how likely is it will the company actually achieve its mission and vision. That gives you a good sort of gauge of morale and confidence. 2 is to do the same pre-mortem question. And then 3rd is, I just love this question in general because it's the fastest way to get an information edge, but it's, what do you believe to be true about your, this company that nobody else on the team would agree with you with? So great way to surface insight. If you have all that, you have trust with the stakeholders, you'll get good results at this meeting. Okay, 2, the workshop itself. The output is very simple. You're just producing 1 objective, 3 key results. In terms of criteria around this, I assume there's some familiarity with these. I'm happy to talk about this online or offline. I've written about this as well in terms of what makes a good objective and key results, but I'm just going to kind of gloss over what that is. Just know it's qualitative, 3 quantitative measures. They fit together. It's the one thing everybody focuses on. Okay. The way to get those is to do a little design thinking exercise. So you have people use sticky notes, like generate lots of ideas. You go broad, you collapse those into a single objective. You do the same thing with the 3 key results. But you use variables instead of the actual measures. So X, Y, Z for the metrics that you come up with. And then you set the targets with a heuristic, basically saying, make it ambitious enough that as of where you are today, it's a 50-50 chance of achieving it in a quarter. So it's like a coin flip, right? It leaves enough uncertainty, but it's also not impossible to hit. The other thing you want to do, and this is in many ways kind of the secret sauce of this process, is you want to assign stewards. So what is a steward? So each key result has a steward, and that person, they're not responsible for achieving the key result. They are accountable for knowing at any time, especially during the weekly sync, but really at the drop of a hat, what the odds of success of achieving that particular result are from where they stand. So they're not responsible for getting things done necessarily, but they are accountable for acting as this nerve center to basically have access to the right information to know what the odds of success are. Super, super important. Like this is like the most important role actually in the context of this team. Okay. How you do that, it's obviously highly dependent upon the situation, what the key result is, et cetera, but you need to know what that gut confidence score is. All right. Last but not least, communication, disseminate the strategic intent. You should do this for the whole company. It's basically 3 things, sort of what I recommend. 1 is a headline. You articulate the crux of the problem that you're trying to solve over the next quarter, and you just outline the OKRs. So 1 objective, 3 key results. This is what we're focused on, guys. 2 is I highly, highly, highly recommend, and this is a big advantage I think remote companies actually have over in-person ones. If you have kind of the fortitude to do this, it's kind of difficult. It can be a little awkward. It can have a chilling effect depending on company culture and everything. But if you're willing to record like everything, like all 3 of these steps, the setting, the syncing, and the reflection, there's all kinds of great AI tools that'll automatically transcribe stuff using Google Meet. A lot of my clients use that. You can just tick a box right now, creates a transcript. You publish the recording, you publish the transcript. If you really want to go the extra mile, which again, it works now. I think it's awesome. You can use GPT-3 to create automated summaries and just pop that into a Slack channel and invite people to interact with the transcript. So if somebody is like, hey, I'm really curious about this thing that you talked about here during the discussion, like some frontline employee who's just interested, they can tag an executive or tag somebody in a comment, and you all of a sudden now have this really interesting communication channel that's asynchronous. So something to think about. And then last but not least, there's a technique called back briefing, which it's time tested. Prussian generals used this to win wars in like the 18th and 19th centuries. And basically what they did was they would take the strategic intent of the commander and they would communicate it to their team, but then they would have their team immediately communicate it back to them and see if there were any gaps. And you just do that until it's like crystal clear what you guys are trying to do. Okay, now let's go to the weekly sync. So this is like unbelievably important. This is the template that I recommend teams, clients use. Basically, there are three components. You start by building momentum with weekly demonstrations of accountability. Then you dive into the objective and the key results to keep everybody on track and decide what you're going to do next week. And then you don't really ever discuss the KPIs or what you see in the lower right, but it's just there for contextual information. Okay, so here's an example. This one's kind of fun, but like imagine you had some startup that's doing like private hypersonic jets to for crypto oligarchs to like go to charter cities or something like that, right? 2022, very zeitgeist kind of thing, I guess. This is like an example of what this would look like at the weekly sync. You share it. You have all the executives participate, and you start down here. These are two ad hoc tasks that came out of the previous week's conversation that those two executives committed to. The whole idea here is you just showed that there's coherence between what somebody says they're going to do, what they actually do. If that happens every single week and you publish this to the entire team and they can see when execs say that they're going to do something and then they do it, it builds momentum. It works like magic. It's kind of incredible. So the flip side of this though is make sure you're not assigning anything to anyone or nobody volunteers to do something where there's like, it may not happen, because once this breaks, that's like quite bad. It can kill your momentum. Okay, so all you do is say, did this get done? Yes. What was the result? Great. Same thing here. Takes 30 seconds. Then you dive right into the meat of the discussion. So confidence scores. Each steward, and their name is their initials here, so these are stewarded key results, they basically pop in a score from 0 to 10, which represents 0 to 100% confidence that they're going to hit the key result by the end of the quarter, given how much time you have left. Don't overthink this. This should be super gut driven. The reason why is our emotions contain an incredible amount of information, just super compressed, right? So you want to have the steward just say, oh, like I'm feeling 30%, right? I'm feeling 50, 80, whatever percentage it is. You'll have time to unpack that during the discussion. Once you have that out there, the way that you prioritize what to discuss is you look at the difference between this week and the previous week, and wherever there's the biggest gap, that means that something changed, something happened. That's actually a signal that there's insight there that needs to be unearthed and maybe used, but at the very least, understanding. Maybe you can tease out some kind of cause and effect, but there's fog that you can disperse. So have an open conversation, ask lots of questions if you're facilitating as chief of staff. But the idea is you gain some kind of like shared understanding about what happened and what it is that you now understand about the external environment that you didn't understand before. Then you transition to, okay, where's the biggest gap between where we are and where we want to be? So here would be, the second one, right? Like, how do we get this from 10% to 50% next week? Really easy way to kick this off is to say like, hey, whoever P is, what would have to be true for you to increase your confidence to 50%? Oh, well, I need to see this, this, and this. You go, okay, great. Guys, what's one experiment that we can run this week to get that going? Awesome. Now, here's the thing. You can have an entire meeting where you only talk about one key result. That's fine. This is not a status update meeting. This like inverts the entire, it's very easy to default to status update stuff. This inverts the entire thing so that the only information that gets shared is vital information in the context of your shared strategic end. That's why this works so well. So you're not wasting any time at all. And then over here, you have, KPI contextual information. You can have, I don't know, there's sort of best practices, like people say, oh, it should complement the key results. Sometimes I actually think the most important thing is you just see how many weeks you have left. And then you can include some metrics. I would say no more than 2 that just give you some contextual information. I've seen everything from like how much cash you have left or, whatever to NPS, and maybe it's one of the key results, but it's context. Okay. Last but not least, reflection. So you have 2 hours to gather this information. I would recommend just doing this in order. Key result 1, you go through step by step. You as a chief of staff are facilitating the meeting, figure out what the actual is, and then just color code it. If you smashed it out of the park, great, that's a green. If it's, you didn't quite hit it, that's a yellow. If you whiffed it, it's a red. That actually is kind of like the platonic ideal of what you want to get to. And what I mean by this is like OKRs are, yes, they're about driving things forward, but it's really more about learning. That's actually more important because you're accumulating an information edge faster. And if you're doing this correctly, you set ambitious targets, you're probably going to completely miss one because there's something you didn't know about, which got in your way. But now you know about it, so it's good, right? You can decide what to do about it. If you absolutely smash something out of the park, it's because you discovered something that you didn't know that you knew, or some resource that you got access to that just was like the serendipitous great thing. So that often happens. And then the third one, it's kind of one or the other. If you're missing all of them, something's maybe not going quite right. If you're hitting all of them, probably not ambitious enough. Okay. Then you want to talk about, was this actually like correct in the context of your understanding of the strategy of the company? I talk about this like spiritual correctness, technical correctness. So spiritual correctness is like, was this measuring like roughly the thing that we wanted to move toward? And if the answer is no, then you actually need to go a little bit deeper into like your understanding of what the strategy actually is, because you're assuming something that's like more core to what you're trying to do. And that needs to be fixed before anything else. Okay. And then if it's spiritually correct, was it technically correct? Was there a better measure basically that you should have been using? And just asking these 2 questions helps you understand strategy changes a little better that you might want to make. And then 2 is just getting better at the process itself. How can you set better targets, better measures, that kind of stuff? Okay. And then really the point of this is to unearth insights. And sort of my worldview, like there are basically 2 types of insights. There are growth factors and limiting factors. So a growth factor is something, if we're to use the foggy metaphor, it's like, I don't know, you discover like a motorboat out there somewhere, like, yes, like great, like let's like hit it. It's, your technology is the perfect fit for some unmet customer need you didn't know about. That's a growth factor. Let's catalyze it now that we know about it for next time. A limiting factor is just something that got in your way. It was a challenge you didn't know about. And you then decide, is there anything that we can do about it? And then if we can do something, should we do something given our resource constraints? But it's something that hindered your progress. You just want to surface these things so that you have an inventory of them and you understand what it is you learned from this process. Last but not least, I strongly encourage teams to do this, to identify one heroic narrative per key result. What this means is basically like you identify one person, it's not a team, it's a single person on the team, frontline person, could be an executive, doesn't really matter, but one person who went completely above and beyond in attempting to achieve this key result, and they embodied the values of the organization that you want everybody else to emulate. Write that down. This becomes your company culture like mythos. And if you just get into a pattern of doing this each quarter, it's like you've got it's better than writing down like 5 values or something. It's like you have actual like concrete stories that you can direct people to. All right, pitfalls. More than one objective and 3 key results. You become unfocused. I just don't think this works. We can talk about it. Sharing with board or investors, do not, this is like for internal consumption only. Part of the problem with sharing this with like external stakeholders is it becomes something that you're beholden to rather than a tool for learning. And that can, same reason why you shouldn't be using OKRs for performance reviews. Never skip a weekly sync. This happens all the time where somebody's like, the team gets really confident, something comes up, you're at a conference, whatever it is, and you skip the sync or you move it, like don't even move it. And I basically guarantee you the whole thing comes unraveled. I've seen this happen. I've done this myself. I always regret it. Don't skip the weekly sync. Other sort of like secondary things, comms failures. basically the executives are like super excited. They love the new strategy OKR, but then it just is not properly communicated to the rest of the team. The recommendations I gave of publishing everything and doing the back brief, a really good way to make sure this doesn't happen, but it can. And then, syncs descend into status update hell. Like this is just some deep like human thing that we like to do where we just like list off what we did last week. Like don't do that. Like stick with the confidence score method of teasing signal from noise, and this will work. And then the last one, there's not always, but often a temptation to choose key results that are outputs. So it'd be like the classic example is ship feature X. Like that's not a good key result. Good key result is either a vital outcome. So you've affected some kind of change in the external world, usually in the context of your customer, or a quality input. And this, the example I always use for this is I worked with this one sales team where they were going after a new segment, really long sales cycle. And so they chose a vital outcome that was getting to demo, basically like in the pipeline with this new set of prospects. And that's a lagging indicator, but they also chose just like first contact with new prospects in the segment as a vital input, because they knew with pretty high reliability, if they just pull that lever over and over and over and over again, they're likely to get good results. At the very least, you're going to learn a lot. All right, next steps. So a lot of this methodology is I would say like 30 to 40% of what I do at this point is based on a book called Radical Focus by Christina Wadke. Some of you are probably familiar with this. I've read like every book on OKRs, every blog post, like, podcast, whatever. There's literally nothing that I would recommend except for this book. When I do like free consultations with prospects, like if it's not a fit, like totally fine, read this book, just like follow it to a T, and you'll get like pretty good results. So highly recommend that. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I actually don't really check email that much, but I do check LinkedIn. So if you have any questions, like happy to answer any particular questions you have. Let's connect, shoot me a message. If you're ready to just like put this into action, let's chat. You can book some time with me at gsdat.work. I just put that in your browser it'll go to my Calendly page. And now we're going to go to Fist of 5 and the question and answer. This went a lot faster than I anticipated. All right, so Fist of 5, if you guys wouldn't mind, let's I know not everybody has their camera on. So what we're going to do is if you can't, okay, so from 0, you just spent 30 minutes with me. Your time is super valuable. This is like a very expensive presentation in terms of quantifying all of your attention. 0 being this was a complete utter waste of time, and 5 being you got a lot more out of this 30 minutes than you expected. If you could just put 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the chat, that would be super helpful. So 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Seems like we're averaging a 4 here.
Averaging a 4. Fantastic. All right. So let me ask, first of all, Corinne, why didn't you give a 3?
Why didn't I give a 3?
Yeah.
Because I actually took notes and wrote things down because I didn't want them to escape before we got to the next slide. And that is rare for me in a webinar. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Lily, what would it have taken for you to get to a 4?
Conversely, probably the desire to take the notes. I feel like I may get there in answering some of the questions that I think you'll get to in the end, but I feel like there's a little bit of missing net new that I'm waiting for.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So maybe this is all old hat. Cool. All right. So that's good. Just kind of meta lesson. I always like to ask that. I recommend chiefs of staff ask that at each one of the components as well. It's a good way to get feedback and learn quickly, improve your process. Okay, with that, I think we can go to Q&A.
So I'll read all the ones that were in the chat, and then
Okay.
people can ask other ones. So could you go a little deeper on why is it important to align on one objective?
Yes. So I'm going to show you Actually, let me just pull up my old deck. Hold on one second. All right. So there are a few reasons why this, I think, is one of the easier ways to demonstrate this. There are two kind of extremes around this when it comes to getting alignment with OKRs. So if you have no OKRs at all, then people are going to default to just focusing on like whatever's top of mind for them, their personal problems. That's bad. Like it becomes obvious when this is the case, when there's no like clear direction. Things devolve into like, politics and our, weekly syncs and everything, our status updates and whatever else, and nothing moves, right? So this is called like Brownian motion, just kind of stochastic motion of the organization overall. You're going to spend the same amount of money doing that. If people have like individual objectives and key results, like for their team, you essentially get the same thing happen. It's just like more fractal, right? Like we could zoom in and see that, people are going off in different directions. That's maybe okay to do. I've personally never seen this. I've never worked with a team that's actually gotten to this point where it ended up being the right thing to do. So it clearly lots of teams do multiple OKRs at sort of the team level. Well, actually, so let me address that question in two ways. One is, unless you have multiple business lines, like GE or something like that, like 99.9% of companies are not in this position. You should never have more than one objective and 3 key results for the entire company, because then you're not being strategic. Strategy is about identifying the crux of a problem, and it's about making difficult choices. And if you want outsized results, you have to not do something that's tempting, right? Like you're always going to have multiple stepping stones at any given time that you can step out to. And if you want good results, you want to go fast and you want to learn fast, you got to pick one. That's just essential. In terms of having different teams do like OKRs, I really recommend, I've worked with one team where it was kind of more of a bottoms up thing, where they had a high performing cross-functional team that ended up setting like a good example for the rest of the company. If people are forced to do OKRs, like if it's your first time doing it, and there's kind of this like top-down compliance thing, you're very likely to just like miss the mark. So I recommend getting the executives to really like demonstrate doing this well, be as transparent as possible. And if it works, people will naturally become interested and want to emulate it. And when it's done right, I mean, you do get these things. It's unified, it's effective, it's efficient. Does that answer your question?
This was Ebony's question. So Ebony, does it answer the question?
Yeah, I think it was a thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
Cool.
If Christian, if you don't mind, I do want to dive into this one a little bit more, only because as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, we are like in the thick of it right now, and our execs are leaning towards like 3 company OKRs.
Yep.
Across different areas of the business and areas of focus. So whether one's being more product driven, one being more go-to-market driven. How do you help bring folks back to, hey, let's just focus on one, make sure that we're getting this one right?
Well, I mean, I personally, like, I will tell a client, like, unless that's possible during our engagement, then I just can't be of help. Part of the reason why is, I mean, if you're already, so I have had clients that have transitioned where they were doing OKRs where they had multiple before. Mm-hmm. One of the problems that becomes quite apparent if you follow this process or anything where you have a weekly sync or whatever, it's just too much information. Like there's not enough focus to go deep enough in a particular sync to like address a root cause issue or come up with like a creative solution or surface enough information to generate understanding if you have multiple objectives. I mean, it's just like, math, right? It's like even if you're going through like status update mode or something on this, you have, just a few minutes for each one. And at that point, it's not a good use of people's attention. Like that should be sent as some kind of status update. The reason why you get everybody together is to engage in like a live discourse. And the more focused you can be, the deeper you can go. And that depth is where you're going to get good content that you can apply to, week over week, tactical decisions and then strategy overall. So the bottlenecks like human attention is a really big part of it.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Cool. I think Lily had the next question. Lily, do you want to read your question?
Yeah, sure. I just was curious how you think about company size as it relates to this model. I think like there's also just a complexity level where it's related to the question about one objective. I'm just like, at a certain point, do you see there being a cap on this model working for how big your company is, where you might need a little bit more on the list?
You mean in terms of more objectives or?
Yeah, more layers probably. And maybe also not the same like 5 people at the exec level who are the, you know, the closest to everything every week. Just like how you think about moving the template based on company size, or maybe you don't.
Yeah. So to caveat this, I've never worked with a company that had more than, I think, 300 employees
Mhm.
on this. In this way, I was on the receiving end of OKRs that did not get particularly good results at a big company where it was many, many objectives and it did not work. So my suspicion is, again, because the bottleneck here is human attention, that this scales and it works. This works with 2 founder teams too, but generally people are not going to feel enough pain to change what they're doing until you hit that level of scale where it becomes obvious you need like a little bit more process in place. So yeah, I mean, it's possible that, I mean, there are tweaks you want to make for your organization, but in terms of scaling issues, I'm not aware of any situations in which this would like fundamentally change. I think that having multiple, having OKRs or something that like feeds back into it, like if you're an executive, you then have, you know, let's say 5 direct reports or something, like you can have an OKR for them or something using like a similar process, but you're still accountable for linking those things together as a participant in both sessions. But for a lot of teams though, like OKRs are not necessarily the right thing to use. It's always right for the executives because you're trying to do new things and it's a cross-functional team. But if you're like chief HR officer or legal or something where it's more operational and you don't have additional capital in terms of like human talent and attention to allocate towards doing something new, then you might want to use like Six Sigma something to like make operations really efficient. So yeah, I hope that clarifies. Cool.
Lily, do you have a follow-up? Okay, cool. Chris, I think you're next about the cadence of the meeting.
Yeah, it was thanks so much, Christian. This was super informative. It was this pertaining to the slide on the weekly check-ins. Does that methodology work of like the confidence interval and all that? Does that work if your executive team doesn't meet weekly, like they meet monthly?
No.
Is it the same, or is there some other tweak that you would put for this? And let's assume I can't get them to meet weekly, right? Like that's not an option.
Yeah, if they can't meet weekly, then that's just going to be a limiting factor to doing this. I have one client that's like really committed to trying to do things asynchronously and write things down. And I think as an ethos, that's great for teams and remote teams and everything. But I think it's again, it's like the bottleneck is just like human nature, like it's attention. And the fact that I think there's something about the cadence of like the quarters and the weeks where those are periodicities that like people just learn and like update things on. And yeah, I've never worked with a team that couldn't commit to meeting once per week at the same time. And I don't think that this would work if that were the case.
Okay. And just to follow up, how do you move an executive team from the status update, right? Like, so when they meet monthly, it is very like status update heavy. So I'm not going to use this, obviously this methodology because it doesn't work weekly, but like, what recommendations would you have to move them into, you know, key result, diving in at what you just described?
Yeah. So the fundamental change is you're flipping the paradigm. And again, like it's a little bit of a clunky metaphor, but I do like the metaphor of like the human body in some capacity, because like corporation, root of the word is, you know, corpus, which means body and everything. And executives are supposed to be performing like executive functions, like planning, you know, resource allocation, things like that. If you imagine yourself as a human being, if you had like a spreadsheet of all of your nerve endings, and you're just going through one by one looking for like red or something like that, super inefficient. Whereas you actually want like a sorting mechanism, which that's what feelings are, emotions are to a certain extent, like pain or whatever, demonstrates that there's something that's vital that's inhibiting your ability to achieve your particular goal. And that becomes an automatic filter that causes your attention to go to the thing that deserves your attention. And so that's like the paradigm that you get out of using the confidence scores. I'm sure there are probably other ways to do this, but the idea is you have a measure of whether or not you're tracking towards something that's vital. And once you focus on what's vital, that's beyond what any single person is doing, that's for the whole organization, all information, all discussion should be filtered through that. And that also means that a lot of, maybe 50% of the team is just not really participating in the meeting quite as much that week because everything's going fine. So yeah, focusing on what's vital and having some kind of filtering mechanism for the information that's the way that you flip the paradigm.
Thanks. It's helpful.
I think the next one is Will in the chat. Will, do you want to read?
Which one was it?
About the individual.
Oh, yes. So on this weekly sync, are you also starting to identify and bring up those individuals that have been true champions of these KRs as well, or is that saved for more of that monthly larger review session?
That's a great question. I would save it for the quarter because you're going to have collected more data at that point. Yep. That's a great question. I mean, that's something probably good to just keep tabs on in general. Do you mean in terms of like bringing that up during discussion or like literally bringing them into the meeting?
Just bring it up during discussion. So maybe it's even a drip of, hey, don't forget, keep your eyes out for champions here, versus like actually diving into whom may be that champion.
That's a good question. I would save it for the quarter, but I think this kind of naturally emerges because you're going to be aware of like, what are the crises that you need to deal with or outsized things that you need to do. But during the quarter, if you just have that process where you commit to picking out one per, you'll have enough data at that point that it should be kind of, relatively clear what the number one example you have is.
Cool. Thank you.
I think Jay is next.
Oh, thanks, Rahul. So I had a question on stewards, and specifically around the steward selection for key results. Is there any best practice you have around, specifically, I'm thinking about either seniority or proximity to the issue. So you mentioned that, they're not necessarily the person who's going to be kind of like leading the work, but should they absolutely not be, or should they not be a C-suite or any insights there?
Yeah, so definitely it should be somebody who attends the meeting. So if you have, for example, like an executive team of 5, then it should be one of those 5 people. Now, in having gotten a bunch of reps in with different teams around this, like in theory, you want to separate the person who's going to be able to affect it the most from the steward, because maybe they'll not be like, they don't want to look bad or something like that. They won't surface it. In practice, that I haven't really seen that be much of an issue. So the thing that's most important is you can count on that person to actually like go gather the information and be a good nerve ending or nerve center. So yeah, I mean, best practice would be to have that not be like if it's some marketing thing, if you have like a certain number of leads generated or something like that, then yeah, technically it should not be the marketing person. But it can be. It's not really like, yeah, so it's not hard and fast. The most important point is that you're getting good information. That is by far what you want to optimize for.
Thanks.
Cool. Mr. Rowe, you're up next if you're still on the call.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, team, and thanks, Christian, as well. Before I hit to my long question, I just want to follow up on Jay's last one. On the left-hand side of the slide, we see here Are those the stewards? And so the stewards, the action items are meant to be only people, sorry, the action items on the left-hand side, you said earlier, they need to definitely be achievable. Like they need to be by the next time we meet, something
Yeah.
that should have gotten done so we don't lose momentum and break that.
Yeah, I kind of glossed over this. So the way this works is you basically want like a rotation of people who step up to like do certain things. The point of this is to just build momentum by demonstrating accountability. So like, you know, very like technical definition of like integrity is you do what you say you're going to do. So like there's reliability around saying I'm going to get a result and then you get the result. And so you want to kind of like, as a good facilitator in this meeting, rotate around in terms of who gets assigned certain things, or, you know, ideally they step up to the plate to do it. This one over here, you start the meeting with where it's like, okay, Charles, did you do this thing? Maria, did you do this thing? Those are just parties to the meeting, not necessarily a steward. And then ideally what happens is during the conversation, you'll identify 2 more things that come up where you just account for them here. And then literally when you update the slide, you just copy and paste this over, and then you're ready to go for next week.
I got it. And a lot of today's lessons seem like they revolve around constraint in a good way, you know.
Yes.
We had action items like this, but it, you know, that list can grow or ebb and flow depending on the week or the stuff. So it got pretty lengthy and statusy as well when we've done it. So I like the idea of getting to 2 or 3. The long question, I'll try. Would you rather read it, Christian? You want me to kind of summarize? I don't know how people like to.
If you don't mind summarizing, I'm reading while you do it.
Basically, when you get down, the same question, kind of nibbling at it from a different angle of like getting to one objective with so many different teams, departments, stuff to do. How do you get to, how do you maintain activation across the entire org without it getting watered down into something so generic, which is like, all right, we're going to hit this ARR target, or we're going to hit this net new ARR target. If it gets so high level so that it can be affected, everybody can feel like they have a role in it. Is it too generic at that point? Is it not really? Because I think if you talk about one specific product or feature and we have all these other folks that are working on other things, like how do they identify with it? Unless you raise it up to such a level where like, yeah, we're all affecting revenue, or we're all affecting profitability, you know?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll give you 2 answers. One is like, this is extremely difficult. Like this is very much an art, and figuring out like the trade-off between breadth and depth when you choose which stepping stone to step out to is just super hard. And so doing like a good job facilitating that 5-hour meeting is, you have the constraint of 1 objective and 3 key results, but you're kind of doing this optimization function together where it's like inclusive enough, most importantly, that it's the correct strategic move. Right. And so you're making the choices, you're identifying the crux of the problem and going for it. The flip side to this is like some teams and some people just need to take a back seat certain quarters. Like you know, like what everybody is doing is important to some capacity, but depending on where you are on the map, it's not of equal importance. So like certain teams are going to have to, like, maybe there are issues with marketing, or you've identified some crazy new channel that nobody else knows about. You should be focusing all your energy on that. And that means that maybe there's not something around product R&D that makes its way into, you know, all 3 key results or something like that. So I think in terms of getting, what I would say is, I mean, the executives, right? Like they're basically, and this is getting now more into like one-on-one type stuff, but like they're responsible for guiding their team in the right direction. But, you know, so they're aware of the North Star, and there are other things that are like foundational that need to get done, but not everybody's going to be working on things of strategic importance all the time. This is an invitation to do that, but, you know.
Yeah, they don't need to see. Okay, so basically everybody doesn't need to see themselves in the quarterly objective or key results per se.
I mean, I don't, unless you have I can't think of a concrete example where that, I mean, if somebody doesn't see what they're doing at all in it, then like something's like gone wrong. But yeah, unless you have a specific example.
Like the go-to-market function to me is always way more measurable. And so it's a lot easier. They tend to organize themselves around metrics and goals a lot more easily than R&D does. And so the OKRs effort that we've made has always been most challenging, but hopefully most impactful on the R&D side, because revenue knows what they're trying to do. Marketing knows what they're trying to do. It's very data-driven anyway. Yeah. And so if we start, my original question was to try to find one all-encompassing objective that includes folks from across the organization feels like it would just lead me towards one of the revenue targets. But maybe I'm hearing that don't worry so much about that in terms of what you end up settling on for a given quarter.
Yeah, revenue can be a good target. I have a bunch of examples. It's a little bit outside. I mean, if you send me a message, I'd be happy to chat with you about it and show some of the examples that I have. One of the reasons why I'm hesitant to do that is because there's always a temptation to copy or like emulate what's there. But at the end of the day, it has to be totally personalized to what the company needs to do at that point in time. So let's maybe take the conversation offline. I'd be happy to have a longer one.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Christian.
If I may, I maybe I have an example that could help. If you're having a service that you want your customer to use, the time between the moment they start to want to subscribe to your service and the moment when they are already using the service in production or already using your service, that time is really interesting and everybody can contribute. And sometimes R&D needs to do something so that that time is shorter, for example.
Absolutely. And it ladders up into that result. So they have a proximal thing that they can affect that then affects it. Absolutely. It's a great example.
I think Will's up next.
Sorry, Christian, for all the questions, but what about, have you experienced executives that have evaluated quarterly versus first half or second half OKRs? So extend the timeline for an OKR.
I've seen it. That's a good question. So you mean like, if I'm understanding that instead of doing it quarterly, you do it at a 6-month cadence?
Yeah.
I've seen it. I mean, I think it's there's something fundamentally human around the 3-month thing. It's like we're somehow wired for seasons. And like, I've seen it where there's like a year one and people set goals like weekly or monthly. And my intuition and kind of what I've seen seems to reflect the idea that there's something about a quarter where that's like exactly the right amount of time to do something outsized. Trying to think. I mean, I have seen where like it's basically the first OKR just goes for another quarter because it was completely whiffed. But that was a cycle of learning. And the problem is if that had been a 6-month thing, then it's going to take you longer to learn that. So, I mean, it's possible people do it. I recommend a quarter.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I just put something in the chat about quarters from David Sachs at Craft Ventures, which I thought was a really good read. Anyone else got questions? Adam or Chris or Diane, Isaac? I think we probably got time for 1 or 2 more. Rachel, anyone else?
We got one more if we're waiting. Christian, are some of these meetings brief, given the fact that you're trying to be so, measured in what you do or don't cover? It's not a status meeting. So do you find that there's an issue of it going like on this example here? I think you mentioned earlier, we would talk about row number 2 probably first because it went in the wrong direction in terms of confidence from week over week. That might be where we spend most of our time. The third one looks pretty innocuous and the first one looks quite positive. So would we spend a lot of time on number 2 and then the meeting? I don't know. I don't want to feel like I'm trying to fill up time unnecessarily. So I'm always
I'm happy to answer that. So if nobody has anything to talk about, like that's actually really bad, because it means that you didn't learn anything over the past week or nothing changed, which means, yeah, that's not good. So in terms of deciding which one to talk about, I think, looking at, I would, in this case, I would start with the first one actually, because there's the biggest change, which means that there's a gap that needs to be filled in terms of common understanding. So what happened over the past week? Was it that external reality presented something new, or we ran an experiment and got a really good result? And why was that the case? What's the relationship between cause and effect? You could talk about that for a long time, and then move to like, 2 to 1. What outsized move, what bold thing can we do to move this up substantially over the next time would be another thing. Going from 4 to 4 is actually like, that's pretty bad. If something is static, that's like a negative signal. So I would rather have something go down than it not move at all, because it meant you spent the same amount of money, the same amount of time passed, but nothing really happened. There's nothing to learn.
Yep.
Which is not good.
Yeah, I really like that. Thanks.
I actually did gloss over one more question in the chat, which was, you mentioned the anonymous survey. Is there a template or something that you'd be willing to share with folks?
So that's a great question. I wish I had a template. What I would literally what I would recommend doing, take kind of 2 seconds to write it down right now, is like basically like a Google survey, anonymous Google survey. I know there's like some Slack tools and everything you can do this with as well, but it asks 3 questions. So 0 to 100%, what's the likelihood that we achieve our mission and manifest our vision over this period of time? Second question is, if we fail to do that, why would that have been the case? And then the third is, what do you know about our company that nobody else would agree with you on? So just pop those 3 questions in to whatever tool. And yeah.
Nice. Cool. I think we're at time here and want to be respectful because I know you got to jump in a minute, Christian, but thank you so much for joining us. I think people had a really good time, at least evidenced by all the 4s.
Yeah. Tough crowd. All right, cool.
All right. See y'all later. Thank you.
That's good. Thanks.